Hi, I'm Steven Fleener. I'm the creator of the Visual Non-Glossary, and I'm really excited to tell you all about it. Simply put, the Visual Non-Glossary is the easiest way to get students talking about academic content using academic language. The Visual Non-Glossary is born from the simple idea of teachers trying to get their students to engage in small group or peer-to-peer structured conversations using academic language. And it always starts with a question. And as a digital content creator, and before that as a educational consultant, and before that as an instructional coach and high school teacher, what I have found over and over again is a lot of frustration when teachers ask their students a question and have their students talk about this question. And we see issues of equity, and we also see issues of depth of conversation. We see students not talking about the question. We see students talking about things other than the question. And we also see disparities within our class. We see the most confident and gregarious students talking about the question, and the shyer students or the more struggling students not engaging in these conversations. So I could ask, for example, the question, how do fossils form? And I would get a lot of variety of different responses. But again, without any kind of structure or support, what I'll find is that my most confident students will answer, my least confident students probably won't answer at all, and the depth of the answers will not be necessarily as rich and robust as I'd like to see. So one way to support that question is to ask the students a question and then show a visual. So I could go to an image search and type in fossil, and I have lots of different images of fossil. Obviously, I have to pick the right picture of a fossil that I want to show. But even if I do show a visual, and then I ask the question, how do fossils form? I might get I might get a lot of confusion from my students. I might have students think that a fossil is a skeleton, and it's not a skeleton. Or I might have students that think that a fossil is a rock, and that's also not exactly true. What what I won't see though is I won't see the depth of all of the idea of how fossils are formed, both in terms of the process of the geological processes involved in fossils forming, as well as maybe the connections to other units, like how fossils can be utilized as evidence for evolution of life forms over time. So that's where the idea of the visual non-glossary came about, to create structured visuals that serve as an anchor for lessons for multiple structured conversations around them. I'll show you an example of a structured visual. Here's a structured visual for the word fossil. It shows how a fossil is formed from a living organism. It gives clues about the time scale at which this happens. And it also shows that fossils were once living organisms that then become compacted in layers of soil over time. So from this visual, students can infer very deeply about fossil formation. And also, it levels the playing field. If a student has never heard of a fossil, they can participate in the conversation about how fossils are formed using this visual. And so the purpose of the visual non-glossary is to serve as is to provide several different lessons that serve as anchors of structured conversations. Because here's the idea. If I present this visual to my students and I have them discuss it in small groups, and in that discussion, I structure those conversations so students are using the word fossil. If I have multiple opportunities for students to do that, then they're going to acquire this vocabulary, and they're going to acquire all of the depth and complexity behind the vocabulary. So the visual non-glossary is a series of lessons, and the anchors of those lessons are structured visuals like this one. What you'll notice is in all of these lessons, as a essential skeleton of the lesson, is several conversation prompts. And these conversation prompts are deliberately designed to be at increasing levels of Bloom's taxonomy. So the depth and complexity of these questions are going to increase. And importantly, they're always going to be centered around this word. whatever the word is that is central to the lesson is. In this case, it's the word fossil. So what you'll see is that there are sentence stems that support each of these questions, and the sentence stem always uses that word in it. By the end of the lesson, every student who engages with a visual non-glossary lesson are going to have practiced using this keyword at least 3 times in 3 different contexts at 3 different levels of depth and complexity. And when they truly master and acquire vocabulary that way, they also master and acquire the content concepts behind that vocabulary. So let's dig into a visual and glossary lesson. Let's take a look at it. We can see, for example, this word for fossil, and what you will see is that it's these visuals that appear at multiple grade levels, these vocabulary words that appear at multiple grade levels, will be differentiated based on the standards at that grade level. But I've showed you a science example. Let me show you a social studies example. Let's imagine I'm a social studies teacher. And so I'll go to the social studies page, and I can even pretend I'm a U.S. history teacher, let's say. So what I'll see when I'm searching for U.S. history visuals is I'll see a lot of recommended lessons. And I want to show you what one of these recommended lessons looks like, because this goes beyond just structured conversations. It also includes structured reading and writing, and I'll show you what I mean by that. So let's say I'm teaching the Civil War, and I want to talk about the Appomattox Courthouse surrender. So we're going to have a lesson that's completely centered around the Appomattox Courthouse surrender. So you'll notice several things. You'll notice the conversations, and we're going to dive into a lesson in just a minute. I'll go ahead and load that on the backside. What you'll also notice is you'll notice the standards at which this lesson appears, or this lesson addresses. You know specifically that this word appears in these standards, and if it appears in multiple grade levels, you'll see that listed here as well. What you'll also see is the ability to view all of this content in Spanish. So all of these visuals and all of our lessons are available entirely in English and Spanish. And you'll also notice a lot of other different resources. For example, we'll see a guide for teachers about what students might notice when they're looking at this visual, what students might wonder about when they're looking at this visual, and then example student responses at both a low level as well as a high level based on students looking at the visual. So here's what a visual non-glossary lesson looks like. It starts with a simple warm-up where students are just going to write down or verbally share with a partner what they notice or what they wonder about in this visual. And I really encourage teachers to have their students just make a list of anything that they notice. So they might say they notice Richmond, or they might say they notice a calendar, or they might say they notice the American flag, or they might say they notice these 2 people are shaking hands. And they can say anything that they notice. That helps to get students familiarized with the visual. A lot of times, especially visuals that in which the standards have a lot of depth and complexity, a lot of times these visuals have a lot of details in them. So just having students just start to break down the details can really be helpful, both in building their confidence as well as just getting them familiar with the visual. And then the lesson goes into objectives. It has a content objective and a language objective. And this language objective is always structured as the last question that we're going to answer students at the end of the class. And this is really important because we can set up the structure of the lesson by having students interact with the objectives. There's some activities on how to interact with the objectives. That's in the next slide. But also to tell students at the end of the lesson, you're going to have to answer this question using this vocabulary in complete sentences. So, the crux of the lesson, the bulk of the lesson, is a series of structured conversations. And what you'll notice is that these conversations are all structured with the QSSSA or QSSSA process. If you're not familiar with that, it is a really highly structured and effective approach for getting all students to engage. As the teacher, you get to decide ahead of time what are going to be your signal, your instructions for sharing, and how you're going to assess. And I'll show you what I mean by that. So if I'm a teacher and I'm going to project this view on the projector to my students, what I'll do is I'll say, let's think about this question. Let's look at this visual, and we're all going to give a signal. Can we all raise our hands? I'm going to ask all my students to raise their hands. And I'm going to say, here's a sentence stem. When you can finish the sentence in your head, then lower your hand. So the signal is a thinking signal. They're just going to be thinking about it. And then I'll give them specific instructions. I'll say, you're going to share with your elbow partner, or maybe the table group. And I'm going to say the person who's going to go first is going to be the person whose name is closest to A in the alphabet. Or maybe I'll say it's the person with the brightest shirt, or the person with the darkest shoes, the person closest to the window. All of these are just random ways of having a different person start first in the group or in the partnership every time. It helps hold students accountable, and it also ensures equity of making sure that the least confident or the least talkative student isn't necessarily always the student to share last. So that structure really helps to engage students in structured conversations. And then it also helps to, it's essential to have some form of equitable assessment, either through random name calling, which is what I 100% recommend for the majority of instances, or calling on a different student from a group, or having students all write down their answers, which is what I always recommend for the last question of the lesson. But in having a structure in which students are going to be randomly called on and any answer is okay. And I also encourage teachers to tell their students, you can share what you said, or you can share what your partner said, as long as you're using this word in a complete sentence, using the sentence stem. And then we repeat this cycle several times. So students will see other visuals with other questions. And then they will see questions asking them to make a comparison or to describe a relationship between these two concepts. And then in our lessons that we recommend, we also provide structured reading. And I'll show you what one of these reading passages looks like. We have created reading passages that are differentiated and that are aligned to the visual. So here is an example of a reading passage that is differentiated at 3 different grade levels. There is a reading passage that is designed to be specific for this grade level, and in this case, this was an 8th grade lesson, so this is an 8th grade reading level. A reading passage that's designed to be at a lower grade level, so maybe a 6th or a 7th grade reading level. And then a reading passage that's designed to be at a higher grade level, so this might be a 9th or 10th grade reading level. So these differentiated reading passages come with these recommended lessons. And then there will also be a list on the screen showing of what students need to be paying attention to while they're reading. So it helps to structure the reading. After they read, they will have a post-reading conversation. Again, this can be structured with the QSSA process. And then there will be a final language objective, the one that we introduced at the beginning of the lesson. And students can give a response signal using their fingers to show how ready they are to answer the question. And then what I really recommend and that these lessons support is having a structured conversation around this final question, having students share this in small groups, but then they write down their answer. And this is the closure of the lesson or the exit ticket of the lesson. It serves the same as language objective. So these lessons also have a lot of extension activities that come along with it. And these are great. They can be used at the end of the lesson, at the end of the unit, or in the middle of any of these lessons. And all of this content is available on the Visual Non-Glossary. So if you go to the homepage of the Visual Non-Glossary, you'll see that we have a lot of structured visuals and lessons based on those visuals with a lot of vocabulary words and conversation prompts. And you can browse all the different lessons that we have and all of the different lessons that are literacy-based that have those reading passages that are recommended, both in English and Spanish. So I really encourage you to check out the Visual Non-Glossary if you haven't already. and I really hope you enjoy it.